Welcome back to another Linux Audio Soliloquy video. In this episode, I would like to go with you through the guide that I recently published on how to get started with music production on Linux. So I am sharing my screen with you, and I think the best is that we go step by step through the guide. And I think something that is important to note before we start is that I made this guide with someone in mind that is actually already making music, maybe on Windows or Mac OS, and is interested to start with Linux but does not know where to start, right? And so in this guide, as you can see, it is divided into a couple of different chapters. The first is the computer, the next would be the audio interface, then the Linux distribution, graphical interface, the display server, audio server, then DAW, plugins, and low latency optimization. So I guess many of you probably have a laptop, right? It's like in my case, what I did is I built specifically a computer for my music production needs. And these are the specs here. In the guide, I also have a link to my setup. If you click this link, then you get directed to a page where you see all the gear that I use. I try to really keep this more or less updated and complete. But in my experience, if you go all AMD, you should be probably the most safe. Like if you have an AMD CPU and AMD GPU, you should have the least issues in my experience. But then again, I also don't have much experience. I only read online a lot about having people who having issues with NVIDIA GPUs and stuff. But I think the situation is generally better now. And in general, it's actually really impressive, like how many different configurations Linux supports. Like, I don't know if you ever started to experiment with Linux, but if you have a boot media, like a USB stick with a Linux distribution on it, you can actually try to boot from that stick if you put it in your computer and see if the computer runs more or less fine with Linux. And I haven't come in over a situation where it would actually not work at all. There were sometimes smaller issues, like especially with laptops, when, for instance, the trackpad or something did not work because the driver was not, or the trackpad model was not supported. But in general, I think you should not have a lot of problems, especially if you have a desktop computer, should be more or less fine. So that's the first thing. You need, of course, to have a computer. And then the second thing is you not necessarily need one, but you probably want one, an audio interface. And with audio interfaces, it's actually not that easy to get something that really works perfectly. In my case, for instance, I chose an RME Fireface. And this is actually, I chose this because it allows to configure the unit completely on the device. That means you don't need any software for this. Because the first aspect that you should look out for is USB class compliance. Like if a audio interface is USB class compliant, then it generally runs on Linux. But you can still come into a situation where you want to configure something or certain features are not available without additional software, right? Usually you have a software that you install on Mac OS or Windows to, let's say, set up the routing, set up submixes, set up effects and stuff like that. And in my case, I don't have that. In my case, I configure everything on the unit, which for me is fine, but I think for other people might not be fine because it's too cumbersome. And so there are some like initiatives for instance, for the Focusrite Scarlett series interfaces, where you have a complete control panel that someone developed and made it open source. So you have to do a little research what you need, like if you want an entry level option, or if you want something solid or something really pro. And I have listed here some of the options that you have available. And in the future, I also want to work on this on the Linux Audio Development website. Like there's already in the FAQ, there is one point that talks about the hardware support for audio interfaces, and there's also a little chapter there, but we want to actually compile a complete list and make like a table to display like what features are supported on Linux and what not, etc, etc. But yeah, that would be the second thing that you need to do. You would need to choose an audio interface if you need one. You can of course also work with, for instance, your internal sound card, but I guess as soon as you get more experienced with it, then you would want something with a higher quality. And then, like with Linux, it's a little bit more complex than with Windows or Mac OS. It's not just that you choose Linux and you're good to go. With Linux, you have to choose a distribution. And in my opinion, there's basically like two ways that you can go. One way is that you are a person who say, I'm actually not really a nerd, not really a computer person, and I just want my computer to work. I want it to be simple and reliable. And then I would suggest that you choose either Fedora or Debian. I guess probably Debian would be the safest option to choose here. Fedora is, I guess, also very solid and yeah, simple to understand. However, if you are a person who is really interested or maybe even like really loves computers, then I think an Arch-based distribution is really the right way to go, because it kind of forces you to learn some stuff. And with the Arch Wiki that is also linked here, you can basically look up most of the things and actually easily, more or less easily, dive into certain topics and find solutions for maybe needs that you have or maybe problems that you run into. And so I see mostly these two options, like either you choose something very simple or you choose something that you think, I want to invest some time, want to learn something. And then if you want to go the Arch route, there are a couple of alternatives to actually the real Arch Linux. Arch Linux, I think, is probably the most time consuming in the beginning, because even if you use the simplified Arch installer, you have to spend some time to make the Wi-Fi work, load your correct keyboard layout and stuff like that. So if you're not into that, then I would suggest that you look at one of these options. I personally started with Manjaro Linux back then. And apart from that, I didn't like it visually much, which was easy to change, like most things in Linux. It was actually perfect for me. It was very reliable, very easy to understand. And like at the same time, I could use the Arch Wiki to learn stuff if I had to. Yes, but ultimately, I think, you know, nowadays, with a modern Linux distribution, you can't really go wrong. Like if you have something that runs Pipewire as the audio server, which is the modern option that comes with Linux distributions, then it actually, in my opinion, doesn't really matter what you choose. You can have a look at all the options that are available. Like there's even stuff like NixOS, which is also very geeky, I would say. Linux Mint, very simple, very popular. And then you even have some stuff like Ubuntu Studio or AV Linux. And these are actually distributions that are specifically tailored for multimedia use and make it relatively easy to start with stuff, because most of the things are configured and installed out of the box. Again, I am now on Arch Linux. I started with Manjaro, but personally, I think it doesn't matter that much. Then most of these distributions come with in flavors, so to speak. I'm not sure if all the distributions use that term, but usually you can choose what kind of desktop environment they come with or what kind of window manager. And just to explain to you, like if you take Mac OS, for instance, it's the same there. Like basically the system underneath what you see on the screen is actually not graphical. It's like just you know, the kernel, just a terminal maybe. And then the system loads the user interface, which you are used to, and Windows, probably the same thing. I don't know too much about Windows, to be honest. But on Linux, you of course have like a lot of choice. Like I personally, I am on GNOME. I guess it's probably the most widely used and considered to be the most boring desktop environment that you can choose. But since I came from macOS and I liked the aesthetics of it a lot and the app ecosystem a lot, that was a good choice for me. And I still can actually use it quite fast, have a quite good workflow. But there are tons of other options. And I think here you either take what the distribution comes with as default, and just go for a while and see how you like it, or you do some research and look in the different options that you have. Maybe what is important to understand is like a desktop environment is basically the full thing with settings app, with text editor, with terminal emulator, etc., etc. Whereas the window manager is really only the graphical interface, and you have to take care to install the respective tools that you need to run your system or configure your system. In general, I think a window manager is not really suitable for a beginner, but there are also initiatives that prove the opposite. Like there are a couple of I would not call it distributions, but a couple of projects that basically pre-configure everything so that you can just, as with other Linux distributions and desktop environments, just install it and just use it. But in general, I would say it takes more time and it's more, you have more options, of course. Can be extremely fun if you are into this, but can also be time consuming and can be frustrating if you're not into this, if you don't want to deal with it. Personally, what I think is very interesting to look at is Cosmic. It's not completely released right now. I think it's still beta. But Cosmic is basically a little bit like a mix between GNOME and KDE. KDE is, I would say, a very popular, maybe the second most popular desktop environment. Is a little bit more closer to what Windows maybe represents. Like people that come from Windows usually feel very comfortable with KDE. People that come from Mac OS usually feel very comfortable with GNOME. And Cosmic, I would say, is like a mix, like the best of these two worlds. And there's tons of other things like XFCE and then all the window managers like Hyperland or Neri, etc. So I think you need to either just take what the distribution comes with or do some research. And then I think this is more like informational, because in most cases it's either not important or you never come in touch with it. But if you come in touch with the question between whether the distribution is installed with Wayland as the display server or X11, then personally I would say, I mean, it's a heavily debated thing, right? But Wayland is considered to be the future of display servers on Linux and is maybe not as rock solid in day-to-day use as X11 is, but most of the distributions already set the direction and actually pre-install Wayland. So if you have the option, personally, I would go with Wayland because, as I say, it's the future, but you can also use X11 and you should be fine with it. Usually, if you don't even know about it and you don't care about it, then you would not even notice it. So yeah. So my suggestion is go with the default that the distribution comes with. And if you have to choose Wayland. And then the next thing is the audio server. And for the audio server, it's like that, I started with Linux actually when Pipewire as a replacement for all the previous things like Jack and Pulse Audio was like very early in development, but I decided to use it from the beginning. I had lots of little issues in the beginning, but nowadays it's super solid in my opinion, in my experience. And that's why I don't really have any experience with the previous things like Jack and Pulse Audio. I only have experience with Pipewire, and I think also if you install your distribution and it asks you for what you want, if you want Jack, Pulse Audio or Pipewire, I would choose Pipewire. Especially because I really don't have any idea how Jack or Pulse Audio works. But that said, what is important to understand is that Pipewire actually comes with built-in compatibility layers, so to speak, for both of Pulse Audio and Jack. That means if your app that you want to use it relies on Pulse Audio or relies on Jack, it will work with Pipewire. So it's basically a worry-free thing, and I would suggest to use Pipewire. And then the next thing is the DAW. And like when I switched to Linux, for me, it was relatively easy because I was already using Bitwig Studio, which from the beginning was also offered for Linux. But let's say you use something like Cubase or Logic or Ableton Live, and you are in the situation that you need to choose something as an alternative. Then I have listed here some of the options. Of course, like there's open source, free and open source options like Ardor, Qtractor, or Zrhythm. And then there's commercial stuff like Bitwig, N-Track, Reaper, Studio One, Renoise, Waveform, etc. There's actually a bunch of different options that you can choose from. And I think you will not be able to go around that. You have to spend some time and look at the different options and choose one. Again, I chose Bitwig Studio. And then I think something that in the beginning for me at least was like a little bit of a hurdle was plugins. Like we all, I guess, love plugins, all of us music producers. And so that's also why I started my Linux audio development initiative that I previously already opened up this year. So the thing is, I want to actually encourage developers to offer their plugins for Linux, because still, I would say the majority of them do not offer their plugins for Linux. There are a couple of options, like how you can actually run also Windows plugins on Linux. Like for instance with YaBridge, I have the link here that you can have a look at. I never used it. I just hear that many people use it and they're happy with it. It of course has a little performance drawback, but I guess for most use cases it's not really that big of a deal. But there are also, of course, a bunch of plugins that do not work with YaBridge. Like people have, like same like with other technologies like Wine, where people try to make Photoshop run on Linux and stuff like that. Some make it work, some have a lot of issues, right? But there is a really cool website that I actually also regularly contribute to, and it's linked here. It's called Linuxstore. And Linuxstore is actually a directory of native Linux audio plugins. And when you look at the website, you just see always the newest stuff on top, and it's updated regularly, even though like it's of course like volunteer work. Like also the guy who makes the website, Alf, he does this in his spare time, and sometimes he has not enough resources to update it quickly. But I would say every two weeks or so, new stuff is added. And here you can basically filter by developers, you can filter by tags if you're looking for something in particular, you can filter by formats, like if your DAW only supports a certain format, you can look here. Then you can look for free stuff that's open source, and you can also search, of course, like for instance, if you want to see all the stuff by Audiothing, then you can just filter for that and it will display all the Audiothing stuff for you. So that's really helpful because there's actually a lot already available for Linux. Like many new vendors actually join the Linux movement. Like I would say every other month or so, someone new is coming to the Linux platform. And here on the linuxaudio.dev, on the Linux Audio development website, you also can look at this list version. And in this list version, you actually see all the vendors that are already like offering their products for Linux. And with some of them, I also made interviews. So you can actually click on these links and read the interviews with the developers. So that about plugins. Yeah, all the details are here also. And then I also have a link to an article that I constantly update. And that is an article that basically shows my favorite plugins. They are here categorized by the vendor, but they are all underneath each other. They are all listed here, and you can have a look at those. Those are my favorite plugins that I more or less use all the time. And again, I update it all the time, so it's actually, I think, already quite a few years old, but I add the new stuff all the time and remove some stuff if I don't use it anymore. And then, so let's assume you have all these steps, you completed all these steps, you have a system installed, you have your DAW installed, and you're good to go. And now you want to optimize the system for better performance. And for this is actually a good option is to use this little tool called Millisecond. I link it here in the article, and I think I can run it here so that you can have a look at it. So Millisecond is actually a little tool that when you first open it, there's pretty sure not everything is green. Some things will be not ideal for music production, but it will tell you what those things are, and it will also link you to articles. So if you need to do something, you can actually look up these things. There are links to the wiki, and you can look these things up and learn something about it. And depending on what distribution you use, you will have different ways to solve the issues or to improve the situation. As you can see, like in my case here, everything is basically green. So I took care already about everything. And I also have a text file here that basically shows what I did. And I am happy to share this, but again, this is specific to Arch Linux. I'm not sure if all these things would work on other distributions. I guess they would, but I didn't put it on my blog so far because I have no experience with other distributions, and I don't want to provide information that eventually will not work on other distributions. But so what I did is I installed the Millisecond app, and you can also do that graphically, but here I have the command, the flatpak install command that installed the Millisecond app. And then the Millisecond app basically told me that I need to disable the hyperthreading stuff. And I have here the commands that I executed to actually achieve that. And I also added like a kernel argument to my, I use systemd-boot to my bootloader entry. I can maybe show that quickly so that you can see how this looks like. So this is my terminal here. Let's have a look at this file. So here you see that file, and in that file, like these are the different arguments, the kernel arguments that are added on when the computer boots. And here is this no SMT entry that basically tells the system to disable SMT. And then what I also did is I added some stuff to the limits.conf file. Nice typo here. And this is actually also like, you know, I use Nano as a text editor, but this is the command to open that file. And in there, I added basically these parameters to adjust the limits. And then on Arch Linux, there is a real-time privileges package that I installed with the Arch package manager, pacman. So that would be pacman-s real-time privileges. And then I added my user to the real-time group and rebooted the computer. And the last thing I did is I set the swappiness to 10. There's also the command here. I will add these commands in the description of the video, and eventually I will also add them to the article. But I think it's not so important that you follow this. I would rather advise that you follow the guide in the Milliseconds app that gives you basically, or leads you the way how to configure everything properly. And when you have done that, then you should actually have, depending on the performance of your computer, a pretty well optimized system for music production. And then something that I think is just important for you to know to take full advantage of your system. Like there are two tools depending on what you like. I personally like Helvum, and Helvum is basically a pipewire patch bay. And so as you see here, for instance, sometimes it's a little bit chaotic depending on what you have open. But what you see here is that basically Pipewire feeds this, Bitwig feeds the music via the Fireface UFX into OBS. That's what you hear in the background. I have here on a second space Bitwig running with this loop. And then you also see that the auxiliary input 11 from my Fireface, which is my microphone that I have here on the desktop, goes into OBS as well. And you could now here basically patch anything to anywhere. Let's say you want to record your web browser or whatever, you just patch it to your DAW. And so it's really amazing actually to learn about the possibilities that you have with this. That's why I think when you're done and you are actually already making music, then make sure to have a look at this because it's really cool. And then what I also advise, that you just get familiar with, is FlatHub. I think most of the Linux distros now support Flatpak out of the box. Flatpak is the format that is like provided on FlatHub. FlatHub is basically like a software store for Linux, and there you can also search for all kinds of apps. It's not all of the apps are on here, but you can actually find quite a lot. There are all kinds of little apps to, for instance, set the levels for your pipewire signals and stuff, and you can find it all in here. So this is also something that I advise to anyone to have a look at. And that's actually it, I think, for the guide. Just to go through the guide, that would be it. Again, I think I will update it with the real-time optimization commands that I used, just as a reference for Arch Linux systems. And other than that, I think that's more or less it. You should have a very well-running system that is really capable for music production. Of course, there's tons of things that you need to also think about, like making backups of your computer, which is also, you have many options, of course, on Linux. But if you want to, if you want more information on what else besides like the first steps on Linux is necessary to have a really comfortable and luxurious computer life on Linux, then let me know. I'm happy to make other guides. So we're also thinking about, for instance, to add these kinds of guides with, maybe setup instructions to the Linux audio development website as kind of a, blueprints or recipes of setups that actually work. Like, for instance, my setup, and in these guides, it would also say about or inform the people about potential things that are not ideal. Like, for instance, in my case, where I have no software panel to configure the audio interface, I have to do everything on the device. And so I think that would maybe make it easier for people to start with Linux, to have a look at systems that actually work, like what computer does the person use, what audio interface do they use, etc., etc. We want to make this as transparent and easy to understand for newcomers. And again, also in my guide, I don't say how to actually install Linux. These are all things that I think there are already a lot of guides out there, but then again, it's not easy maybe to find for people. So also, if you want to have this information, just let me know. I'm happy to add this maybe to my guide or make a new guide for how to install your system. Okay, I think that's basically it. So I hope that helped a little bit to understand the guide better. And maybe motivated some of you to start with Linux. If you have questions, as always, let me know. And I hope to be able to make more videos, like maybe every other week or so. I really enjoy it. Okie dokie. Thank you very much and talk to you soon. Bye bye.